Welcome to the Homeschool Show from North Carolinians for Home Education. Our goal is to help you homeschool with confidence and joy. I'm your host, Matthew McDill, and we have as our co-host, again, back, John Lewis.
Yes, thank you.
For some reason, you looking at me just cracks me up, man.
Well, that's part of that stage performance thing. I was always taught to look at the person singing lead and when you're in a vocal ensemble.
But I feel like you're grinning at me or something.
Oh, I am grinning. I am grinning. Because I know what I have in store.
All right, what do you have?
Yeah. So it's been a long time since we had a dad joke.
I know. Bring it.
So what do you call a fish with no eye?
Thank you very much. All right, tell us what we got on our show today.
While Matthew stares at me, we've got the homeschool news today. We're going to tell you how to get audio recordings from the Thrive Conference, and we're going to talk about NCHE Dad's Retreat this fall and give a legislative update. I'm excited to hear about the Dad's Retreat, and if you didn't make it to the Thrive Conference, you really want to check out how you can get those recordings. And then we're going to talk about homeschool conversations today. In that segment, we're going to have Zan Tyler on a Zoom call. Zan is a homeschool speaker, author, and podcaster, and Zan was a pioneer of home education in South Carolina, working to make homeschooling legal in her state. Also, we're going to do the Homeschool Helps with Amanda segment, and this time Amanda will not be in the studio with us, but she'll be here on video. Amanda continues her discussion of various homeschool approaches by taking a closer look at the Charlotte Mason method of homeschooling. So
That's right.
That's what we got.
All right, with homeschool news then, let's talk about a little bit of legislative update. As we've been talking about, SB 411 is a bill that we helped get written and introduced, and it helps, it allows students to take the PSAT and AP tests in high school, allows homeschool students to do that. They've been having difficulty doing that. And if you want to know more about this, you can go to nche.com/PSAT bill. We're still waiting on the Rules Committee to take up this bill. So here's what you can do. Contact members of the Committee on Rules, Calendar, and Operations of the House and ask them to support the passage of this bill. We'd appreciate your help in doing that because this is going to help homeschool students across the state. We have an update on the newly amended budget bill to expand opportunity scholarships to homeschools. The conference committee has not been formed to work on a compromise between the House and Senate versions of this bill. We will update the page nche.com/legislative-update. You can find out what's going on with this bill at that time. In general, this is our view on this. Opening the eligibility for opportunity scholarships to homeschool students may seem innocuous now. So what this is going to do is allow homeschool families to get funding from the government for homeschool. However, it could be the proverbial camel's nose under the tent with serious unintended consequences in the future. Giving state funding to some homeschools could open the door for increased scrutiny and regulation for all homeschools. In general, our bottom line is if we're going to change or increase regulations, or if the state's trying to give us money, the homeschool families and NCHE say no thanks. So we'll talk a little bit more about that next week because there's some other bills that are also trying to expand funding for homeschool families. Okay, conference recordings. Did you get to any of the workshops while you were there?
I did.
Some good ones?
Yeah, it was great stuff.
Yeah.
Really impressed.
So if you missed the conference or if you were there and would like to get some of the recordings, we're selling MP3s at nche.com for $6 each. You can also purchase the whole conference, all the workshops, on a flash drive for $180. So you want to check that out. Also, the Dad's Retreat. You wanted to know about that. So this is at the Caraway Conference Center. This is the first one that I've known about. So it's been at least a couple decades if they've ever had one before. Maybe the first one ever. Caraway Conference Center in Asheboro, September 29 and 30. So you can go to our homepage, nche.com, and you'll find the link for the Dad's Retreat and find out a lot more about it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. What are we going to do there? Do you know yet?
Yeah, well, we're going to hang out, have a good time, tell dad jokes.
Steaks,
and
shotguns.
But we are going to have some equipping time to help dads know how to
nice
to love their families, their wives, their kids, and encourage each other in that way.
Excellent.
Yep.
Excellent. All right. Check that out. Well, Homeschool Conversation segment today, we're going to be talking to Zan Tyler. For the past 35 years, Zan and her husband, Joe, have been actively involved in the homeschool movement, teaching and mentoring others as well. And at their speaking engagements, they take their audiences beyond the demands of everyday life to embrace a wondrous, life-giving vision of family life. Zan's uplifting podcast, speaking, and writing will equip and empower you with real encouragement, engaging stories, and practical help for your homeschool. Zan's homeschool journey began in 1984 when homeschooling was illegal, and the state superintendent of education threatened Zan with jail for insisting on homeschooling her son. For the next 8 years, she and other homeschool families battled for homeschool freedom and the establishment of landmark homeschool legislation in South Carolina. Welcome to the show, Zan.
Yeah, welcome, Zan.
Well, thank you. It is so great to be here. We love everything you're doing in North Carolina.
Yeah, it's always a blessing to get to catch up with you at the leaders' conferences and things like that. Even though we're neighbors in the state, that's usually where I get to see you, and really appreciate your ministry, Zan.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Matthew.
So let's start off with this beginning of homeschooling in South Carolina, which was right about the same time we were doing it in North Carolina, but I know the journeys look different. I assume that being threatened with jail time wasn't pleasant.
Oh my goodness, it's the most scared I have ever been in my life. And I knew the state superintendent of education. He was a friend of my mother's.
Uh-oh.
And
Oh, wow.
so we just really, our big vision for homeschooling was holding our oldest son back a year so that he would be ready for first grade. And
Oh,
the
my
public
goodness.
schools allowed us to do that. Then they changed their mind. But when they changed their minds, the private schools were filled. And so our only option was homeschooling for that first year.
Mm-hmm.
A friend of mine gave me a book. I thought, this is amazing, but there's no way I'm going to homeschool in 1984. It was very George Orwellian. But the Lord just sort of shut me in and gave me no other path. So our school board turned us down. We had to ask permission in those days. Boy, am I glad those days are over. And then I just in a Hail Mary desperation moment, I thought, well, I'll call the state superintendent of education, who actually observed my mom's classroom when he was getting his PhD in education. So I went to see him. And I said, I called him and I said, Dr. Williams, this is Zan Tyler, Sybil Peters' daughter. Can I see you for just a few minutes? I have a problem. He said, oh, honey, come on up now. I'll clear my schedule. He's a friend.
Yeah.
So I go up and I tell him my situation. And I just expected him to tell me, well, Zan, I know your family. I know you love your child and you only want what's best for him. Let's see what we can do.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, he says to me, well, if you continue down this path, I'll have you put in jail for homeschooling.
Oh, my goodness.
And it was no idle threat. I knew that at the time. And so it was very providential that I did not go to jail. It was not a gimme. I had been active politically in high school and college. And so I had spoken for a senator around the state. In 1972, it was the first year of the 18-year-old vote, and I was female to boot. And so I spoke with him, during that campaign trail. And so when I was threatened with jail, I had to involve my parents. I hadn't told anybody we were homeschooling, including my parents or Joe's parents, to whom we were very close. Wow. And I had to go see my parents and say, I'm homeschooling Ty. I'm going to jail next week, and I didn't want you to read about it in the newspaper.
Oh, no.
Oh, wow.
So we got the senator involved. My dad got the senator involved, and Senator Thurmond flew down from Washington and met with the state superintendent of education on my behalf. And
wow.
So that that just obliterated the threat of jail, for which I was very grateful. But I realized, what about somebody who didn't have a college degree or didn't have a connected family? What would they do if they wanted to homeschool? So, very briefly, Joe and I started keeping a list of anybody we knew that had ever homeschooled or heard the word homeschooling in South Carolina. So our first big threat was when the State Department of Education wanted to promulgate regulations that would require homeschool parents to have a college degree and only use state-approved texts, which means you could use no Christian curriculum. That was our big fight, which we won, but in the process, the homeschooling law that passed was terrible. It was amended on the third reading in the floor after it had been approved in the Senate, so you can imagine what that was like. And so then Mike Farris came in, filed a huge class action suit for homeschool families. Joe and I started the South Carolina Association of Independent Homeschools, which was a private sector organization to keep people from having to comply with the school district law where you had to have a college degree. And so we thought we had 2 years. Mike Farris was helping us from HSLDA before we went to court. They said, everybody said, just keep up with your test scores. Homeschool test scores are great. 3 months later, 11 of our families were charged with truancy, where the deputy sheriff showed up on their doorstep, some of them with the big spotlights, and wanted to give the subpoenas only to the children. And so that was... So fast forward 2 years, the General Assembly in South Carolina actually passed a law naming SCAES in legislation and giving us the same power as local school boards in approving and monitoring homeschooling programs. We like to say supporting homeschool families, but that is the legal language.
Okay.
And Mike said it was the first time in the nation that a state legislature had ever given a private entity that power, the power equal to local school boards. And it was really the advancement of self-government. It was really, it was an important victory. We're very, very grateful.
Well, we are, even though we're not in South Carolina, it was the beginning also of the national movement that brought other states into the process, and we're fighting at the same time. We're thankful to the Lord. We're thankful to you and to those here also who are fighting that battle, because we're just enjoying it now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
that's the truth. But you can never rest on your laurels when it comes to homeschool freedom. And I know y'all do that. You do such a good job of keeping those legislative relationships strong, Matthew, in North Carolina. Kudos to you.
Yeah, that's why we're doing these legislative updates. And we have 7 bills right now that could affect home education that we're going to be discussing next week as well. So we're keeping an eye on it. So we've come a long way in the homeschool world, haven't we? And
we
so
have. It's amazing.
Now you get the privilege of just encouraging and helping parents, right? So
yes, and I love it because the co-op and the state organization Joe and I started, our grandkids are involved in now. So it's just a double blessing all the way around.
So what are some of the most important topics that you're talking to parents about these days?
The first thing is I really believe that homeschooling is a revival movement. And I believe it's a revival that starts in our living room. So I love the fact that we can teach our children to love God and His Word, and it doesn't violate any Supreme Court edicts. I love the fact that homeschooling is really a love your kids movement. And so every day our kids need to know, in the midst of all the disarray and sometimes chaos of homeschooling, they need to know we love them and they are our number one priority. So that's really important to me. I think we need to become students of our children, understand their learning styles, understand the way they think, their spiritual gifts. I just think all those things are really important.
Did you have something, John?
Yeah, I'm just curious. When I listen to your story, Zan, one of the things that intrigues me is that, there are these pivotal moments in history and in our lives sometimes that if we're not careful, we could miss them. I'm just kind of curious. What you did took a lot of courage, and I'm curious, where did you find that courage? Was it something where you didn't realize what was going to happen until after it already started, or did you realize that this was a defining moment?
It was really a defining moment when I was threatened with jail. And that passage of scripture that says, don't worry what happens to you when you're taken to the authorities, the Holy Spirit will give you the words. I just heard this voice in the room saying, well, Dr. Williams, you're just going to have to put me in jail. And I realized that was me talking. I looked around for a third person, in the room, and there was nobody else there. And so that was really my Patrick Henry moment. But I think the main thing is that we will do anything for our kids. I have a little plaque in my office that says, "Worried moms do better research than the FBI." And, when you love your kids, you will do whatever it takes to do the best thing for them. I worried about all those years because the kids were just down at the legislature with me. I mean, this was a family deal. They went with me. They lived down there with me. It was our home away from home. It was pretty hardcore. And the Lord is always so good. Ray Vander Laan, who is a Christian educator, said the books we choose is our curriculum. And that's really important to me. But he said the interruptions and the catastrophes and the disruptions God brings into our lives, it's his curriculum. And so I just have to tell you that my second son, both of my sons just grew up at the state legislature, but John developed a love for the law. He was very close to Mike Farris, watched him lead homeschool moms and dads to Christ in the midst of his legal practice. And so John ended up going into the law. One day he called me and said, "Could I have Mr. Farris's number?" I just was able to pray with my first client. But the end of the story is he was just named as chief legal counsel for the State Department of Education. Now, he's never been in a classroom, public school classroom. His 4 kids are homeschooled. And we had our rally day in South Carolina. This happened in January. So during our rally day, I think, which was in March, he said, "Come on, Mom, I want to take you upstairs." And he took us into Ellen Weaver's office, who's the state superintendent of education now.
Wow.
And he said, "See that chair? That's the chair where you were sitting where Charlie Williams threatened to put you in jail." And this was the beginning of the attorneys for the State Department of Education giving you such a hard time for 8 years. And he said, "Now look what God has done."
Yeah. Praise the Lord.
Oh,
That's
wow.
pretty
What a story of redemption.
Yeah.
Wow.
Isn't it? Yeah,
circle.
God, I love that word redemption because he does take our trials and our hard times and our failures and everything else and is so wonderfully redemptive.
Obviously, your son realizes what a huge thing that was for you to do back then at this point in life. What was going on back then when your kids were with you during all of this? Did they understand what was happening?
They understood a lot. They knew we talked to them a lot about this being our family mission because we didn't want them to feel alienated by the chunk of time it was taken out of our lives. We wanted them to know we were in this together. It was a calling that we were in together. Right. And but of course their understanding was limited. But this was before there was a state organization, so there were many nights they were up at 12 and 1 o'clock with me, folding envelopes and stamping postcards, doing all that stuff to get out information about public hearings. They really walked the journey with me, and I think it's understanding. I think the Lord gives understanding that we don't even know that's there. When our kids live like the world is their classroom.
We have a couple minutes here, and I just wonder if we'll go back to the revival movement thought and the opportunity for parents to disciple their kids. What are some important ways or principles that we would want to encourage parents with in their responsibility there?
Well, this thought of revival came to me from Elizabeth Smith, who is Mike Smith's wife, former president of Homeschool Legal Defense Association. And I really thought that was overreach at the time. She shared with me, she thought homeschooling was a revival movement. But we had just had a pastor speak at our church on revival. He had his PhD or THD and had studied all the revivals in history. So I emailed him and I said, "Dr. Parrish, do you believe homeschooling is a revival movement?" And he said, "Boy, I do, Zan." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, do you know what the Puritan revival verse is?" And I said, "No." And it's the verse from Malachi where it says, God will come in and turn the hearts of the fathers toward the children and the hearts of the children toward their fathers. And because this is happening in the homeschooling movement, I really believe it is a big revival movement. So I would just say relationship is at the heart of it. our relationship with our children, our relationships with the Lord that spill over into their relationships with the Lord. And making life is hard, but making learning in life attractive as a believer, as a Christian.
So what about that relationship? What can we do to make sure that we're focusing on that with the kids? I mean,
I think appreciating the time we have together rather than resenting it is number one. There's a pastor who said the mother's heart is the child's classroom. So we want to make sure that our hearts are right toward our children and that we don't have bad attitudes about homeschooling. And because homeschooling is hard, it's wonderful, but it's hard. And then I think we just, we do our schoolwork together. We worship together. I think we should plan along with our schoolwork. I think we should plan fun times together. I think we should serve our neighbor together. Service was a huge part of our homeschooling experience. I do a whole workshop on that because I think that's so important and it gives kids something else to focus on besides themselves. And it's the fulfillment of the second greatest commandment. Takes the place of popularity in your mind's eye. I just think there's so much to that. But breaks, being outside together, taking field trips together, traveling together when you have the opportunity. I just think all of those things, I just think it's a great, exciting way to live life. And we need to life can't always be fun and exciting, but we need to do what we can to love our children and give them a love for learning and a love for life.
We've been talking to Zan Tyler, podcaster, speaker, author, South Carolina homeschool pioneer. How can people find out what you're doing? Where can they go?
Well, they can visit my website at zantyler.com, and they can find my podcast, the Zan Tyler podcast, wherever they listen to podcasts.
All right. Thanks for being with us, Zan.
Well, thank you so much, you guys, for having me. I always love being with you.
All right. Talk to you later.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, we will now go to Homeschool Helps with Amanda. Amanda continues her discussion of various homeschool approaches, and she'll be taking a closer look today at the Charlotte Mason method of homeschooling. Let's check it out.
Welcome to Homeschool Helps with Amanda. I'm Amanda Wares, Homeschool Helps Director with NCHE. So for the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about different approaches to homeschooling. Today, we're focusing on the Charlotte Mason approach. Now, who was Charlotte Mason and what is her approach? Charlotte Mason was an educator in England in the 1900s, and she had a particular idea about how education should be approached for children. She believed in teaching the whole child and teaching them as a person, approaching their education as a whole person. So there are three main parts to this Charlotte Mason approach to education and homeschooling. And those three parts are atmosphere, discipline, and life. So atmosphere, we mean the surroundings in which a child grows up. A child absorbs a lot from his home environment. I think we could all agree with that. By discipline, Charlotte meant the discipline of good habits, and that is a real focus of the Charlotte Mason approach, especially habits of character. And then this other portion of education, life, this is more focusing on what we would call academics, how that applies. So all of Charlotte Mason's methods for teaching the various school subjects are built around this concept of life, living subjects, living books and experiences, not just opening up a textbook and reading and regurgitating. You will probably hear the words living books in relation to Charlotte Mason education as opposed to textbooks. You will hear about narration of concepts instead of tests or quizzes. Short lessons are always a part of it. Nature study, as well as focus on art and music and handicrafts. Those are all important. Now, there are a multitude of books out there detailing the Charlotte Mason method, even some volumes that were written by Ms. Mason herself. There's also a number of websites that go into great detail, more than I have time for today. One that I think is really good is called everythingcharlottemason.com. There's also a number of curricula based on the method. You have Simply Charlotte Mason. That's a great one. Ambleside Online, A Gentle Feast. Also, Heart of Dakota and My Father's World are popular programs that implement some aspects of Charlotte Mason's teaching. Now, quickly, what are some pros and cons? Pros would be it's easy with the Charlotte Mason method to teach a number of children of different ages together. And that could, especially if you have a large family, that could really facilitate that family style of learning. The focus on living books can make history and science and all of those things more interesting than maybe reading from a dry textbook. But there are some cons maybe. Perhaps this method of education is very different from what we grew up with in traditional brick and mortar schools, right? So it might be uncomfortable at first to adopt this different style of teaching and learning. Also, just like with any other method, some kids, depending on their learning style, may not respond to the Charlotte Mason method of education. So I encourage you, if you're interested in this, do some research and see if it would fit well for your family. I really hope that helps today.
Well, we want to thank you for joining us this week, and we'd love to hear from you. So send your questions to the Homeschool Show at nche.com, and please help other people find the podcast and the show by subscribing and all those sorts of things. You can see us at nche.com/the Homeschool Show.
That's right. And until next week, continue to homeschool with confidence and joy.